The smell of rain always made my instincts restless. Not in the way that most people find rain calming. That soft, earthy petrichor that supposedly soothes frayed nerves and quiets busy minds. For me, rain carried a deeper pull, something woven into the biology I had spent the better part of my adult life learning to manage with suppressants and discipline and a carefully constructed schedule that left almost no room for chaos. My name is Michael Powell. I am 26 years old, a secondary designation Omega, a junior architect at a firm that designed everything from pedestrian footbridges to community libraries. And I was, on that particular damp Thursday evening, standing in the break room of said firm, holding a mug of chamomile tea and staring at the rain crawling down the window like it had somewhere important to be. You look like you're solving a particularly depressing equation. The voice behind me was low and unhurried, carrying that specific texture of someone who had learned long ago that the room would quiet for them eventually, so there was never any need to rush or raise volume. I turned. Robert Morgan stood in the doorway of the break room, with his jacket slung over one shoulder and his tie loosened to a degree that would have been unprofessional on anyone else, but somehow read as deliberate on him. He was our firm's senior project lead, Alpha, 31 years old, the kind of competent that made other competent people feel slightly insufficient. He was also objectively the sort of person you did not want to find yourself staring at in empty break rooms at 7:30 in the evening, because the thoughts that followed were rarely professional. Long day, I said simply, turning back to the window. There was the soft sound of the refrigerator opening behind me, the clink of a water bottle, and then the quiet that follows when someone decides not to leave. You submitted the Aldermore Community Center plans this afternoon. I did. They were good, Michael. Better than good. I wrapped both hands around my mug and said nothing, because compliments from Robert Morgan had a strange way of disorienting me. He was not generous with them. When he said something was good, it meant something precise and considered, not the offhand encouragement that managers distributed like breath mints. Thank you, I said. Another pause. The rain intensified briefly, drumming against the glass. Can I ask you something? I turned again, because something in his tone had shifted. The unhurried quality was still there, but beneath it was something more careful, deliberate in a different way, like a person choosing their footing on uncertain ground. Sure, I said. Robert Morgan looked at me steadily, and for a moment I had the unsettling sensation that he was calculating something. Not coldly, he was never cold, but with the focused attention he gave to load-bearing problems that required getting right on the first attempt. I need a favor, he said, a significant one, and I want to be completely honest with you about what it involves before you say anything. I set my mug down on the counter. My parents are arriving in the city next month, he continued. They have been persistently attempting to arrange a bonding match for me. There is someone they have in mind, someone I have no interest in, and more importantly, someone I have already declined twice, which has not communicated what I had hoped it would communicate. I waited. The clearest way to end that particular situation, Robert said, is for me to already be in a relationship, something they can see, something that reads as genuine enough that the arrangement becomes unnecessary. The rain kept crawling down the window behind me. You want me to pretend to be your partner, I said. Yes. 3 months, until their visit concludes and they return home. I would make it worth your time. I know you've been trying to get approval for the Kellerman residential proposal, and I have some influence over that allocation. I'm not trying to make this transactional in a way that feels, how would it work? I interrupted. He paused. Practically? Practically, logistically, how does this actually function? Robert straightened slightly. Some public appearances. My parents will want to meet you, have dinner, see that we know each other. We would need to know each other's backgrounds well enough to be convincing. I'm not asking you to perform anything that makes you genuinely uncomfortable. We set terms, boundaries, a clear end date. I looked at him for a long moment. Here is the thing I have never told anyone about Robert Morgan, the thing I had been quietly managing like a low-grade temperature for approximately 14 months. I had liked him from the first week of working here, not in the easy, admiring way that people often liked accomplished colleagues, in the specific, inconvenient way where his handwriting on whiteboards made me attentive, where disagreeing with him in meetings felt almost indistinguishable from some form of intimacy, where the smell of him on late project nights, cedar, and something warmer beneath it, made my suppressants feel like they were doing less work than usual. I was, in short, precisely the wrong person to agree to this. Okay, I said. He blinked. It was the first time I'd seen anything resembling surprise cross his face in 14 months. Okay? I said okay, yes, I'll do it. I picked up my mug again. But I want the Kellerman project, and I want it regardless of how this ends, not contingent on performance. A slow exhale. Agreed. And I need ground rules. Of course, whatever you need. We can discuss them tomorrow. I moved past him toward the door. Get some sleep, Robert. You look like a man who's been staring at rain-soaked equations all day. I heard the low sound of his exhale behind me, almost a laugh, not quite, and I walked down the corridor toward the elevator, and I told myself very firmly that the warmth spreading through my chest was simply the chamomile tea. I was, to put it gently, not very convincing even to myself. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the office the following Saturday, and we negotiated our arrangement with the focused pragmatism of 2 people who were both, in different ways, pretending the whole thing was entirely ordinary. The ground rules were mine. Robert had a legal pad, which I had not asked for, and he wrote things down as I spoke, which should not have made me feel the things it made me feel. No touching without verbal acknowledgement first, unless the situation required immediate reaction. No discussing each other's secondary designations with his parents, unless it came up naturally. I did not want to be Robert Morgan's Omega as a performance point. I wanted to be his partner, and those were different presentations. No staying over at either residence without explicit discussion. A weekly check-in to assess how things were going and whether adjustments were needed. And a clean end date. 3 months, his parents' visit complete, and we returned to colleagues without complication. Robert wrote all of it down. Then he looked up. Anything else? Yes, I said. If either of us becomes genuinely uncomfortable at any point, the other person respects that immediately and without argument. No negotiating around it. Agreed. And one more thing. He held the pen. When this ends, I said carefully, it ends cleanly. I don't want things to be strange between us at work. I like this job. I'm good at it. So whatever happens over the next 3 months, we are both adults who can return to being professional colleagues, and neither of us makes the other person feel like they did something wrong. Robert was quiet for a moment. That's important to you. Yes. All right, he said. And something in the way he said it, not quickly, not automatically, but after actually sitting with it, made me believe he meant it. We ordered coffee and spent the next 2 hours building a shared history. His family, parents who had worked hard, loved each other with a particular constancy, and held expectations accordingly. An older sister, Helena, brilliant and direct. A family home in a countryside he described with a mixture of affection and complicated weight. His childhood. Architecture discovered at 14 through a book of bridges, a preference for early mornings, a poor relationship with competitive sports, an excellent one with competitive chess. My turn. I gave him the real things because performing a fake relationship with invented details seemed like a structural failure waiting to happen. My family. Small, close, a mother who baked when she was anxious, a younger brother who was now taller than me and would not stop finding this hilarious. My childhood. Art and geometry tangled together from the beginning, a stubbornness about aesthetics that had driven 3 teachers somewhat mad. The discovery that architecture let me be both precise and wild in the same breath. Robert listened to everything, not with polite attention, with the kind of listening that meant he was filing it, categorizing it, building something from it. Your brother's name? He asked. Patrick, 23, works in environmental science. Are you close? Very. I looked at my coffee. He's the only person who knows I'm Omega without me needing to explain what that actually means for me. Most people hear the word and immediately start adjusting how they talk to me. Patrick never did. Silence. Then, gently, does it bother you when people adjust? It depends on what they're adjusting toward, I said. Concern is fine. Condescension masquerading as concern is less fine. Robert nodded slowly. He looked at the legal pad, and for a moment I thought he was going to write that down too. He didn't. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I've worked with you for over a year, and I have not once felt the need to adjust. I looked up at him. The light in the cafe was the color of late morning, warm and slightly gold, and he was sitting with his elbows on the table and his hands loose around his coffee cup, and he was looking at me with an expression I could not quite name, not calculating now, just present, just honest. I know, I said. That's partly why I said yes. Something shifted in his expression. Brief, barely perceptible. I looked back down at my coffee. We paid separately and walked in the same direction for 4 blocks before our routes diverged, and as we parted, he said he would text me the details of the first required appearance. Dinner at a restaurant his parents had already chosen, and I said fine, and I walked home in the gray October morning, telling myself all the firm, reasonable things. This was an arrangement. I had negotiated it clearly. I knew what it was. I was not 14 months of quiet, persistent feeling away from doing something irreparably foolish. I was being very sensible. The first dinner was not what I expected. I had prepared for performance. I had thought about how to stand next to Robert, how to reference details from our 2 hours in the cafe, naturally enough to seem like a person who knew him, how to field questions from his parents without fumbling the scaffold of our constructed history. What I had not prepared for was Robert arriving at my apartment to walk over together. Standing in my doorway with his coat already on and his hair very slightly damp from the rain. The rain was a recurring problem in my life, apparently, and looking at me for a moment before saying quietly, "You look good." Not performative, not warming up for the role, just said. In the elevator down, we talked about the restaurant. He had been there before, he knew the menu. I told him I was not good with unfamiliar menus under pressure, and he said he'd order 2 things and let me choose between them, so I wouldn't have to scan from scratch, and the ease with which he solved that small problem was genuinely dangerous for my composure. His parents were already there when we arrived. His father was tall with silver gray hair and the quiet, grounded energy of someone who had spent decades being reliable. His mother was sharper, quick eyes, a smile that assessed. His sister Helena was there too, which I had not anticipated, seated beside their mother with a glass of wine and the air of a person who had arrived early, specifically to observe. Robert placed his hand on my lower back as we approached the table. It was light, barely there. And yet, Mum, Dad, Helena, this is Michael. His mother rose first, took my hands warmly. We've heard quite a bit about you. I smiled. I hope some of it was true. She laughed. Robert's father shook my hand with a straightforwardness that I appreciated. Helena studied me with open curiosity that was either refreshing or slightly alarming. He didn't tell us you were an architect too, his father said as we settled. We worked together, I said. That's how we met. Bold choice, Helena said. Mixing work and Helena, Robert said with the mild tone of someone who had been managing his sister for 31 years. She raised her wine glass. What followed was 2.5 hours that I experienced in a strange, doubled way. Part of me performing the role of Robert Morgan's partner, tracking details and responding naturally, and checking our constructed history when needed. And part of me watching the actual Robert Morgan interact with his family, which was entirely different from any version of him I had access to at work. He was warmer, not unguarded. Robert was constitutionally incapable of being unguarded, I suspected, but the deliberateness softened. His mother made him laugh twice with genuine ease. His father asked him about a project, and Robert talked about bridge loadings with an enthusiasm that he kept professionally contained at the office, but here just existed, freely, without the containment. And he included me. Not conspicuously, not to perform, just a natural turning toward me that said in body language rather than words, that I was someone whose presence he found relevant. It was, as fake relationship evenings went, profoundly unhelpful. When his father asked how long we'd been together, Robert said 8 months without hesitation, which was something we'd agreed on in the cafe, and his mother looked pleased and said she thought she'd noticed something different about Robert for a while now, and I watched Robert absorb that with a quiet expression and said nothing. After dinner, walking back through the night air, with the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, we were both quiet for a block. That went well, he said finally. Your family is lovely. Helena will grill you harder next time. I know. I'll be ready. Another silence. Then, my mother liked you. I glanced at him. How can you tell? She asked you 3 separate questions about your brother. She only does that with people she wants to understand, not just assess. I processed this. She asked about Patrick because she wanted to know who you are to people you love, Robert continued. Not just who you are in the room. The pavement was still wet, and the night air had the sharp, clean smell of recent rain, and we were walking at the same pace, close enough that our arms brushed once on a narrow section of pavement, and the brush was brief, and neither of us moved away from it. Your dad, I said after a moment, the way he looked at you when you talked about the bridge project, that's pride. That's a parent who is genuinely proud. It's nice, I said simply. You don't always know, I think, how much you're seen. He stopped walking. I stopped too, turning back. He was standing under a streetlight with the most undefended expression I had seen on him yet. Not quite open, not raw, but genuinely caught off guard, as though I had identified something he had been carrying without fully naming it. "Sorry," I said. "No," he said. "Don't apologize." We looked at each other for a moment on the wet pavement under the streetlight, and somewhere in the middle distance, a car moved slowly through a puddle, and the world was very quiet. "Thank you," he said. We walked the rest of the way home. When we reached my building, he paused on the step and said good night with the careful formality of someone who had briefly been very present and was now navigating their way back to the correct professional register. And I said good night too, and I went upstairs and stood in my kitchen and held very still for a while. This was an arrangement. I knew what it was. I was not convincing anyone at this point. October moved through its days. The Kellerman residential project landed on my desk with full approval, which was satisfying in the specific way that work satisfaction is satisfying, real and grounding and entirely mine, irrespective of everything else. I worked on it with focus. I worked on a lot of things with focus that month, because focus was the appropriate prescription for the particular condition I was experiencing, the condition being Robert Morgan. We had 2 more dinners with his parents during the first month, one at his parents' rental apartment, which his mother had made feel immediately inhabited with specific small choices in the way some people have an innate gift for, and one at a restaurant his father chose for its architectural history, which led to a 2-hour conversation between Robert and me that his mother watched with an expression she tried to moderate and mostly didn't. Between these appearances, something happened that had not been in the original terms. We started talking, not about the arrangement, not about work entirely. At a certain point in mid-October, I sent him a photograph of a building detail I had spotted on my walk to the office, an original cast-iron bracket on a 19th century shopfront that had been preserved when everything around it was replaced, and he replied within 4 minutes with a photograph from 2 years ago of a similar detail in a different city, and from there the text simply did not stop. Architecture at first, then books, because it turned out we had 3 in common and had arrived at entirely different interpretations of one of them, which became a text conversation that lasted 4 evenings. His sister's sharp observations about the second dinner delivered to him afterward, which he relayed with dry precision and which made me laugh at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. The Kellerman project, which he asked about with genuine interest, and whose problems I found I could think through more clearly when I explained them to someone who understood the technical vocabulary without needing a translation. It was not what I had agreed to. It was also not nothing. The first time he used my name in a text, not just as a message opener, but mid-sentence, naturally, the way you use someone's name when you have simply forgotten to edit it out. I read it 3 times. "I was thinking about what you said, Michael, about the load distribution in the Kellerman East Wing. I think you're right, and here's why." 3 times. I was, to be clear, completely undone by a text message about load distribution. I told Patrick about none of this, which in retrospect was the first serious tactical error. The second month brought Robert's parents' visit into its middle stretch, and with it a change in register that I had not anticipated. His parents, having apparently decided the relationship was credible, relaxed into a different mode, not evaluating anymore, but simply including. His mother called me by first name, without the slight formality of the early weeks. His father sent me, entirely unprompted, an article about an architect whose work he thought I might find interesting, with a single line. Reminded me of the way Robert says, "You approach your projects." His sister Helena, who had been sharpening her interest in me like a blade for several weeks, delivered her verdict one afternoon over coffee, when Robert had stepped away. "You're real," she said, simply. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something safer," she said. "Someone who wouldn't actually challenge him." She tilted her head. "He's better when he's being challenged." I said nothing for a moment. "Helena, don't worry," she said. "I'm not about to make this more complicated for you. I just wanted you to know I see it." A pause, and that I think it's good for him, whatever it is. I did not know what to do with that. What I did with it was nothing for approximately 3 days. Then I did something unwise. It was a Sunday, November now, properly cold, the city having moved from gray October into the particular blue-white cold of early winter. Robert had mentioned in passing a particular park near his flat that he sometimes walked on Sunday mornings, something about the geometry of it. The way a specific avenue of old trees created a perspective line that satisfied something in his spatial thinking. I had mentioned that I knew the park. He had said we should walk it sometime. That Sunday, I went to the park at 9 in the morning, on the off chance, which is the kind of behavior that has a proper name, and that name is not sensible arrangement management. He was there, standing at the far end of the tree avenue with his hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the branches, and I stopped at the entrance of the path and considered the full weight of my own foolishness. Then he turned, saw me, and the expression on his face was brief, unguarded, genuinely warm. "Michael," I said, walking toward him. I didn't text because I wasn't sure if. "No," he said. "This is good." We walked for almost 2 hours. The cold was clean, and the trees were bare, and the perspective line he described was exactly as satisfying as he'd suggested. One of those unexpected gifts of urban geometry where you suddenly understand why a space makes people feel a particular way, why they keep returning to it. We talked about everything and nothing in the way that happens sometimes on long walks, where the movement frees something in the conversation, and you find yourself saying things that wouldn't surface sitting still. He told me about the project that had made his reputation, a small footbridge, his third year at the firm, the one that had been shortlisted for a structural design award. The weight of it, at 27, the way it had felt, like a measuring point against which everything subsequent was calibrated. I told him about failing an important review in my second year, a residential project, my own design, the one I had been most invested in, the way the feedback had been accurate and had hurt precisely because it was accurate, and the 6 months of quietly relearning that followed. "What did you learn?" he asked. "That investment in a thing and clear-sightedness about a thing aren't opposites," I said. "You can love what you're building and still be honest about what it needs. The love doesn't excuse the flaws, it just means you'll do the work to address them." He looked at me as we walked. "That's true of more than architecture," he said. "Most things are," I agreed. We got coffee from a cart near the park exit and stood in the cold drinking it, and the steam rose between us, and his shoulder was almost touching mine. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "The person your parents were trying to arrange, you said you had no interest. Is it that you don't want a relationship at all, or just not that one?" A beat. Then, "Not that one." "Because of them specifically?" "Because the idea of being with someone for reasons of arrangement and expectation, rather than actual preference," he said carefully, "has always felt like a particular kind of insufficiency. I would rather be alone than be with the wrong person for structural rather than personal reasons." I thought about that. "Your parents don't know you feel that way?" "My parents know I prefer to make my own choices. They know it in the abstract. They believe I'll eventually make the right choice if appropriately pointed." "But you pushed back twice and found someone to pretend otherwise as a third solution," he said. There was something dry in it, but underneath was something that was not quite dry. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He turned to look at me. The cold had put color into his face, and his eyes were very direct in the winter morning light. "No," he said. "Not even slightly." I looked back at my coffee cup. Not even slightly. The warmth in my chest had nothing to do with the coffee, and everything to do with the fact that I was an omega who had agreed to a fake relationship with an alpha he had been quietly devoted to for over a year, standing in a park in November, being told the arrangement was not regretted, and absolutely none of my reasonable, grounding firm thoughts were currently accessible. I was in significant trouble. My suppressants had always been reliable. I had been on a stable prescription for 4 years, a decision I had made carefully, with proper medical guidance, for reasons that were mine and not anyone else's business to question. They did not erase what I was, they simply gave me more reliable autonomy over it. They made the biology something I could manage, rather than something that managed me. In November, they became less reliable. Not in the way of the old stories, the sudden overwhelming narrative that Omega biology liked to advertise itself as, subtly. A heightened awareness of certain things, of rain, of cold mornings, of the specific quality of Robert's presence in a room. A warmth that had nothing to do with ambient temperature and everything to do with proximity. I told myself it was stress. The Kellerman project was entering its most demanding phase. I was sleeping less than was ideal. The arrangement with Robert was requiring a sustained kind of attention that was its own form of work. All reasonable explanations. I did not tell myself the other explanation, because the other explanation had consequences I was not ready to examine. We had developed, by this point, a particular rhythm. Sunday walks, sometimes. Text conversations that had no architecture in them at all. Music. A film he'd seen that he recommended with the careful specificity of someone who respected that recommendation was a form of trust. Something funny Patrick had said that I found myself wanting to share. Work proximity that had taken on a different quality. We were still professional, entirely, but there was something in the calibration of it that had shifted. A comfort, a familiarity that was real, entirely and verifiably real, because we had built it from actual materials over actual time. The arrangement had, I was slowly accepting, stopped being an arrangement in any meaningful internal sense somewhere around mid-November. The question was, what, if anything, to do about that? I was considering this very carefully one afternoon at my desk when my phone buzzed. Robert, can we talk tonight? Not about the project. Something else. I stared at the message. Me, yes. Your place or mine. Robert, yours if that's all right. He arrived at 7, with takeout from a place we had been to together twice, which meant he had paid attention to what I'd ordered both times, and he set the containers on my kitchen counter, and looked at me with the particular directness he used when he had decided something. I need to tell you something, he said. I nodded. My parents are leaving in 3 weeks. I know, which means the arrangement ends. Yes. He was very still. I don't want it to. The kitchen was quiet. The takeout sat between us on the counter, warm and fragrant and entirely ignored. Say more, I said. I want to be precise about this, he said, in the tone of someone who is being precise, because imprecision in this particular moment would be catastrophic. I am not asking you to extend the arrangement. I'm not asking you to perform anything, or to factor in professional considerations. I'm telling you that these 3 months have been something I did not expect, and that what I feel now is not what I understood myself to be agreeing to, and that I would like the chance to find out if this could be something real, between us, on terms that are only about us, nothing else. I looked at him for a long moment. Robert, yes, I have liked you since my 5th week at this firm. A pause. Something moved across his face, relief perhaps, or the thing that lives just underneath relief, which is more complicated and more complete. 5th week, he said. You disagreed with a senior engineer about a drainage solution on the Hartwell project. You were right and you knew you were right, and you didn't shout about it. You just kept being right, quietly and persistently, until the argument collapsed. I found you. I stopped. Profoundly inconvenient. A slow exhale, almost a laugh. I have not made this easier, he said. You have not, I agreed. No. The texts, the park, your family, who are excellent and who I like genuinely, and not for any performance reason. The way you actually listen, all of it has been very, very inconvenient. He was watching me with the full focused attention I had learned to recognize as his version of being completely present. Is inconvenient bad? He asked. It is when I was trying very hard to be sensible. Were you? Aggressively. He moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just moved, closing the distance between us in the unhurried way that was his characteristic mode, until he was close enough that I was fully aware of the warmth of him, and he said very quietly, Can I stop being sensible for a moment? Yes, I said. He kissed me, soft, first, the kind of kiss that's really a question, that waits for the answer before it becomes anything more. My answer was immediate and clear. I kissed him back, my hand finding the lapel of his jacket, and the question resolved into something else entirely. When we separated, fractionally, his forehead was almost against mine. Tell me what you want, he said, specifically. You, I said, specifically, not the arrangement, you. Something in his expression, that careful deliberateness, softened completely. That's what I want too, he said. We stood in my kitchen for a while, very close, with cold takeout on the counter, and the city doing its ordinary evening things outside the window, and the logic of the preceding 3 months arranged itself into something that finally made sense, not as a constructed history, but as an actual one. We ate the takeout eventually, late, at my kitchen table, and talked for another 3 hours about nothing and everything. The way you talk when something you have been holding carefully has been set down, and you can finally move without the weight of it. He told me about the person he had been before the firm, before the professional armor. Quieter, less certain, a young man who had built confidence through competence, because charm had always felt like a currency he did not entirely trust. I told him about the years on suppressants, the choice, the way it had clarified things for me, not erased my nature, but given me ownership of it, which was different and important. He listened to all of it, not adjusting, not translating, just listening. Helena knew, he said, eventually. What? She said something to you, the second dinner. I saw your face when I came back to the table. He looked at me. She told me afterward, actually. She said, a small pause. She said you were the first person she'd seen me with who made her think I might actually be paying attention. She said something similar to me, I admitted. She's frequently inconvenient, he said, with a warmth that made it clear it wasn't a complaint. I looked at him across my kitchen table. This man I had spent 14 months wanting carefully from a regulated distance, who was now sitting in my actual kitchen, talking about his sister. And I felt something so straightforwardly happy that it nearly startled me. What? He said, watching my face. Nothing, I said. It's just, this is very different from how I imagined it. Better or worse? Better, I said. Considerably better. Imagining is limited by the imagination. This is, I gestured between us, slightly helplessly. This is specific. Yours specifically. He looked at me, then quietly, with the same care he had given to everything. Stay the course with me. Past the arrangement end date. All the way through to whatever this becomes. Yes, I said. Obviously, yes. He smiled. It was the fullest smile I had seen from him. No professional modulation, no careful economy, just the smile. I committed it to memory immediately. Here's the thing about omega biology that most people understand in theory, but fewer understand in practice. It is not the dramatic event the stories advertise. It is not overwhelming and obliterating. It is, in my experience, more like a very insistent argument your body makes, one with structural reasoning and considerable evidence for something your conscious mind is still in the process of formally acknowledging. My body, in early December, began making a very insistent argument. I noticed it first as a different quality of warmth, not the manageable warmth of the preceding months, but something deeper, less containable by the usual disciplines. A sensitivity to Robert's proximity that exceeded what my medication was currently calibrated to manage. A restlessness I recognized. I called my doctor. We adjusted the prescription. She asked careful questions, as she always did, and I answered them honestly, and at the end of the appointment she said, "There is also the possibility that the medication adjustment is less relevant than certain other factors. Your body's instincts are sometimes attempting to communicate things the rational mind hasn't caught up to yet." I sat in her waiting room afterward for a while. Then I went home and sat in my kitchen and was very honest with myself. I was in love with Robert Morgan, not the careful, managed, 14-month cultivated version, fully. The kind that involved wanting to build a life with someone in a specific and grounded way. Not the abstract wish, but the concrete orientation toward him, consistently, as the direction in which things made most sense. And my biology, which was not separate from me, which was a part of my complete self, had been making the same argument for weeks with increasing clarity. This was the bigger news. This was the news that the 3 months had been quietly building toward, cell by cell, choice by choice, step by step down rainy streets and cold parks and kitchen tables at midnight. I needed to tell him. The specific thing I needed to tell him was something that required care. Not because Robert was not trustworthy, he was. I had accumulated considerable evidence on this point. But because there is a particular kind of vulnerability in telling an alpha that your omega biology has decided, with the thoroughness that biology is capable of, that it has made its preferences entirely clear. I sat with it for 4 days, built the words, revised them, considered the ground rules we had negotiated at the beginning, and the fact that the ground rules had been superseded by something neither of us had written down. On a Thursday evening, not because Thursdays had particular significance, but because 4 days was the precise outer limit of my ability to continue not saying it, I asked Robert if he could come over. He arrived with wine and the easy assumption of someone who had been let in, not just to the flat, but to the general territory of my life, and he read something in my face immediately. "What's happened?" "Nothing bad," I said. "Sit down." We sat on my sofa, turned toward each other, and I held the wine glass for the tactile grounding of it. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond, because I've thought carefully about how to say this and I don't want to lose the thread." "All right. My suppressants have been less effective this past month. Not failing, under control, I've spoken to my doctor, but less effective. And the reason for that is something I've been being honest with myself about." I looked at him steadily. "I am in love with you. Not in the arranged, constructed, fake relationship sense. Actually, specifically, in the way that is related to the fact that you listen and you're honest and you solve small problems with the same attention you give large ones. And you smiled at me 3 weeks ago in my kitchen in a way I have been replaying consistently ever since. He was very still. The biology part, I continued, means that some instincts that I normally have excellent management of has been expressing themselves more clearly. Because biology is not subtle about this kind of thing. And I wanted to tell you clearly, both parts together, because they are not separate parts of me, and I don't want you to have only some of the information. A moment of quiet. The wine glass was cool in my hand. Then Robert put his own glass down on the coffee table with the particular care of someone setting aside something that is currently not the point. He leaned forward slightly. Michael, yes. I have been trying to find the right words for something since approximately the second Sunday walk in November, he said. I have draft versions of this conversation in my head that I have rejected repeatedly because they didn't feel precise enough. A pause. I love you, in the full and unambiguous sense of that statement. I am not performing it and I am not uncertain about it, and I have not been uncertain about it for some weeks. The only uncertainty has been about timing and about not wanting to preempt something that needed to develop at its own rate. I looked at him. The biology, he said carefully, is something I would like to understand better, in terms of what you need, what you want, and what the right approach is. Not to make it a structural problem to solve, because you're not a structural problem, but because getting it right for you matters to me. Something in my chest had become very full. That is, I said, an extremely you way to say that. Was it wrong? It was perfect, I said. It was perfect, Robert. He reached over and took my free hand and held it in both of his and looked at me with that full, unmodulated expression. No professional restraint, no careful economy, just him, entirely present and entirely mine. Tell me what you need, he said. Right now? Start there. Right now I need you to stay, I said simply. Not for any biology reason, just stay. Yes, he said, of course. We stayed on the sofa for a long time that evening, talking and not talking in equal measure. And outside the December city did its dark, brilliant things, and inside the flat was warm, and the wine eventually got finished, and at some point, his arm was around me, and my head was against his shoulder, and neither of us had moved for a while. My parents leave in 10 days, he said. I know. After which we no longer have any structural reason to maintain proximity. Deeply problematic, I agreed, given that I now want to maintain proximity for entirely personal reasons. We should address that, formally or informally. I felt him almost laugh against the top of my head. I think we've done enough of formal. Informally then, I said, I'd like you in my life. However, that looks for two people who both work very hard and are both quite particular about space and both need time to think, but who also, apparently, I tilted my head up slightly, can spend 3 hours at a kitchen table at midnight and not notice the time. That's an accurate summary, he said. Is that something you want? Yes, he said. Absolutely and without qualification. I settled back against his shoulder. Robert? Yes. The arrangement worked, I said. A pause. Then, spectacularly, I would say. For entirely the wrong reasons. For entirely the right ones, actually, just not the ones either of us anticipated. He paused. I want to say something, and I need you to understand I have thought about this carefully, and I am not saying it lightly. These 3 months, he said, have been the most alive I have felt in a long time. Not the performance of it, the actual texture of it, the walks and the texts and the dinners and sitting in your kitchen and the arguments about that book and the way you talk about your work. That is real, all of it. His voice was quiet, steady, utterly serious. Whatever this becomes, I want to build it carefully, with you. I pressed my eyes closed for a moment. I want that too, I said. Very much. Outside, somewhere down the street, it began to rain. I started to smile. The rain again, he said. The rain again, I agreed. Does it still make you restless? I thought about it, the warmth of him beside me, the clarity of this evening, of what had been said and what had been understood. The biological argument my body had been making for weeks, resolved now into something peaceful and certain. No, I said, not tonight. His parents left on a clear December morning, cold, no rain, one of those sharp winter days that makes a city look like it's been freshly drawn. Robert and I had gone with them to see them off, and his mother had hugged me for a long moment and said very quietly into my ear, "Take care of each other." I held that for a long time afterward. Helena had said on the last evening before their departure, "I was right, you know, about you being real." A pause, typically Helena. For what it's worth, I was never convinced by people who are too easy to read. You were interesting from the start. Is that a compliment? From me? Absolutely. Walking back from the farewell with Robert, hands loose at our sides, and then at a certain point on a quieter street, no longer quite loose, fingers finding each other without a conversation about it. I thought about the evening in the break room, with the rain on the window and the chamomile tea, and a man in the doorway making an unprecedented request. The thing about decisions made from incomplete information is that their consequences reveal themselves gradually. You agree to something you think you understand, and then the thing itself opens like a room with more rooms inside, each one less anticipated and more illuminating than the last. I had agreed to a fake relationship. I had done it, I could admit now, partly because I was 26 years old and in love with someone I believed was functionally unavailable. And a fake relationship was a form of proximity I could justify. I had negotiated careful ground rules because I had understood, on some level, that this was protective behavior. I had told myself, firmly and repeatedly, that I was being sensible, none of which was the interesting part. The interesting part was what happened when the rooms revealed themselves. When the thing you agreed to for complex, layered, inadequately honest reasons turned out to contain something you hadn't known to want. Not the arrangement, but the person. The actual texture of another human being, built from walks and conversations and disagreements and chamomile tea and structural engineering and the specific quality of a smile in a kitchen at midnight. I had set a ground rule that the end should be clean, that we should return to colleagues without complication. I had said that because I had been protecting myself from the possibility of exactly what had happened. What had happened was better than anything my protection had been protecting me from. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked. We had stopped, I realized, at the same corner from the first night after the first dinner. The streetlight, the wet pavement. Different season now, colder, the sky darker. No wet pavement but frost beginning its early work on the edges of things. I was thinking about the ground rules I set, I said. Which ones? The last one, that it should end cleanly. He was looking at me with those steady dark eyes. I was protecting myself, I said. And I was also, I think, testing something. Whether you would agree to a condition that protected me, even if it cost you something. I agreed immediately. You did. Because it was right, he said. Your protection mattered more than whatever I might have been hoping for. I looked at him. That's the thing, I said. That's the whole thing, actually. That's what these 3 months have been doing, showing me that. Repeatedly, in different forms. He turned toward me on the pavement, and the frost and the dark and the streetlight were all doing their December things around us. And he took my face in his hands with the same deliberate care that he gave to things that mattered, which was, I had learned, how he treated anything that mattered to him. What do you want to do about it? He asked. Keep going, I said. Forward, into whatever the rooms are. He kissed me on the corner under the streetlight, and the kiss was neither question nor answer, but something in between. Acknowledgement, perhaps. This is here. This is real. This is the direction. When we separated, I was smiling, and so was he, genuinely and without any reservation, and I leaned my forehead briefly against his and said, Come on, it's cold. Walk me home. He laughed, an actual, unguarded laugh, the one I had been collecting evidence toward for weeks, and said, Always. We walked. 3 weeks after his parents left, I went off my suppressants temporarily, deliberately with proper medical support, following a careful plan I had discussed at length with my doctor and at length with Robert, both conversations equally important, the second being the kind of conversation that requires all the honesty you have and the complete trust that it will be received correctly. It was received correctly. What the weeks that followed were like is, I think, my own, specific and private, and belonging to the two of us in the way that certain things simply belong between people rather than to any general accounting. What I will say is that there is something clarifying about a time when the biology stops being a thing to be managed and becomes instead something you simply are, in full, with someone who holds all of that with the same careful attention he gives to everything. In the middle of those weeks, one evening, Robert said, Is this what it usually is for you, without the medication? Some version of it, I said, less complete. There's usually still distance. A pause. There's no distance here. No, I said. There isn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then, good. Single word, absolute conviction. I filed it with the smile in the kitchen, with the first kiss with the afternoon in the park and the texts about bridges, and the way he had written my ground rules on a legal pad, as though each one was worth getting down precisely because I had said it. All of it. Evidence of a particular, complete, specific truth. Patrick was told in January. I called him on a Sunday afternoon when Robert was at mine, sitting in my kitchen with coffee and some drawings I had been working on, and I went to the bedroom for the call because some conversations deserve their own space. "You sound different," Patrick said, within approximately 40 seconds. "Do I? You sound like—" A pause. "Hang on. Did something happen?" "Several things happened." "Good things?" "Yes." "Is there a person involved?" It was not a question, the way Patrick asked it. It was pattern recognition from 23 years of being the person who knew me. "Yes," I said. "There is." A sound from my brother that was either satisfaction or the specific delight of having waited a long time to hear something you knew was coming. I told him. The arrangement, the months, what had actually happened, where we were now. Patrick listened with the quality of listening I had tried, over a year ago, to describe to Robert across a cafe table. The kind that doesn't adjust, that just receives. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Michael," he said. "Yes. You agreed to a fake relationship with a man you were already in love with." "Yes. As a strategy. It was not consciously strategic." "You are the most elaborately indirect person I have ever loved," he said, with enormous, undisguised affection. "I genuinely mean that as a compliment." I started laughing. "I want to meet him," Patrick said, "as soon as possible. Tell him I will be assessing his Patrick conversation skills, because I understand they're a key data point." "I will tell him nothing of the sort. Tell him I'm very tall now, and that alone is intimidating." "You're going to be terrible." "I'm going to be wonderful. I'm very happy for you," he said, with the simplicity that Patrick had always managed for the important things. "Genuinely, you deserve this." I sat for a moment on the edge of my bed with the phone, listening to my brother's steady, certain presence. "Thank you," I said. "Now go back to him." I did. Spring arrived early that year, one of those springs that doesn't wait for permission, showing up in late February with tentative warmth and the particular insistence of green things reappearing in places they had been absent. I was working on the Kellerman project in its final stage, the community wing, the one I had been most invested in from the beginning, the one where my instincts about light and space and the way people move through places they consider theirs had been given full rein. Robert had reviewed the drawings twice, with the focused attention of someone who wasn't approving them as a supervisor, but engaging with them as an architect, offering observations that I argued with and incorporated in equal measure. We had disagreed, in February, about a window placement in the main atrium. A real disagreement, not a professional performance. Me with my instinct about proportion, and him with his analysis of load. And I was right about the proportion, and he was right about the load, and the solution was neither what I had originally drawn, nor what he had proposed, but something we had found in the space between our positions. The solution was better than either original. This was, I had discovered, the texture of building something with someone who was your equal. You didn't defer and you didn't override. You worked in a productive friction between two perspectives until the thing that emerged was genuinely better than either of you could have produced alone. It was, in its way, the thing I had always wanted from architecture and had occasionally found in the work and had not until now fully found in a relationship. On a morning in late March, over breakfast in his kitchen, we had been spending alternate weeks at each other's flats with the easy informality of people who have stopped keeping formal score. Robert put down his coffee and looked at me with a directness that I had learned meant a thought had completed itself overnight and was now ready for delivery. "I've been thinking about the Aldermore project," he said. I looked up. The Aldermore Community Center, my first major submission at the firm, the one he had complimented in the break room on the rainy evening that had started all of this. "It's up for review again," he said. "The city planning office wants to revisit the eastern expansion. They've asked if the original architect wants to be involved." I put down my coffee. "That would be you," he said, "if you want it." "I know." A small pause. "I want to flag that I would not be involved in any professional capacity. I've already spoken to the director about ensuring there's no conflict. But I wanted you to know about it before anyone else formally did, because it's yours, and it has always been yours, and you should have it." I looked at him across the kitchen table. The morning light was the particular yellow-white of early spring, and he had been awake for a while already. I could tell by the second coffee cup. And he had spent time this morning thinking about something of mine and making sure the path to it was clear for me. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me. Apply, win, put your name on something excellent." I smiled at him. "I will," I said, "and then I'll come home and tell you about it." He looked at me when I said that. Home. And didn't say anything, but the look was answer enough. that quiet, complete expression, the full one, without the professional modulation. I had been keeping a collection of such moments, since the kitchen in November, since the streetlight, since the park in the frost. Not consciously at first, and then consciously, in the way you start to keep something when you realize it is abundant rather than rare. When you realize the thing you were afraid was temporary has turned out to be the ground beneath you. Love, it turns out, is not primarily dramatic. It is primarily structural. It is the thing that holds other things up. It is in the text at 9 in the morning about a building detail, and the disagreement about window placement, and the conversation about suppressants that was received with complete care, and the breakfast in the kitchen in the spring light, and the going away and the coming back, consistently, because this is the direction in which things make most sense. I had agreed 8 months ago to something I told myself was temporary and bounded and would end cleanly. What I had actually agreed to, without knowing it, was this: the specific, ongoing daily practice of being known by someone who paid attention. Of knowing someone in return with the same quality of attention, which is different from observation, different from assessment, different from the admiration you carry for a person you have constructed from distance. It is the closer thing, the thing that requires you to keep looking, even when what you see is complicated, because what you see is real. Robert Morgan had needed someone to make an arrangement convincing. What he had ended up with was someone who would argue with him about window placement and walk with him on cold Sundays and tell him at 7:30 in the evening, when he looked like a man who hadn't been told something important, that his father's pride in him was visible and genuine and deserved. What I had ended up with was someone who listened without adjusting, who wrote down my ground rules on a legal pad and honored every one of them, who had said not even slightly when I asked if he regretted any of this, who had stayed. The arrangement ended exactly when it was supposed to. What replaced it was neither fake nor temporary nor clean in the sense I had been using the word. It was specific. It was built from actual materials. It was ours. And the rain, when it came, which it always did, eventually, no longer made me restless at all. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me.